Margaret Sullivan stood on the wide porch of her sprawling ranch house, watching the sunrise paint the Arizona mountains gold. At 32, she was the wealthiest woman in the territory, owner of the largest cattle ranch and 3 silver mines. Her late husband Thomas had left her an empire when he died 2 years ago. But wealth couldn't fill the emptiness in her heart. The ranch workers called her Mrs. Sullivan with respect, but she could see the whispers behind her back. A woman shouldn't be running such a vast operation, they said. She should remarry. Let a man handle the business. Margaret had proven them wrong time and again, making smart deals and expanding their holdings. Still, loneliness crept into her bones during the quiet evening hours. Her foreman, Jake Morrison, approached with the morning report. 3 steers had gone missing near the eastern boundary, close to Apache territory. The local cavalry had been patrolling more frequently, tensions running high between the settlers and the Apache bands that still roamed free in the mountains. Margaret had heard stories about the Apache warriors, fierce fighters who struck without warning and vanished like smoke. The townspeople spoke of them with fear and hatred, calling them savages who needed to be driven from the land completely. Yet something in those stories didn't sit right with her. She had learned to read people well in business, and she sensed there was more to the Apache than the fearful tales suggested. That afternoon, while riding the eastern pastures to check on the missing cattle, Margaret heard gunshots echoing from a canyon nearby. Her horse danced nervously as she dismounted and crept toward the sound. Through the brush, she saw a sight that made her blood run cold. 3 cavalry soldiers had cornered a wounded Apache warrior near a stream. The man was clearly hurt, blood staining his buckskin shirt, but his dark eyes blazed with defiance. Was younger than she expected, perhaps in his early 30s, with strong features and long black hair. Even wounded and outnumbered, he carried himself with dignity. The soldiers were toying with him, making crude jokes about collecting bounties for Apache scalps. Margaret felt sick watching their cruelty. This wasn't warfare, it was murder. Without thinking, she stepped from her hiding place. "Stop right there," she called out, her rifle raised. The soldiers spun around, surprised to see the territory's most prominent woman pointing a weapon at them. "Mrs. Sullivan, you shouldn't be here," the sergeant stammered. "This is military business. We caught ourselves an Apache raider." Margaret's eyes met those of the wounded warrior. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. She saw intelligence there, and pain, but also something else, a depth of feeling that surprised her. This was no mindless savage, but a man fighting for something he believed in. "He's wounded and unarmed," she said firmly. 3 against 1 isn't military business, it's cowardice. The soldiers exchanged uncertain glances. They couldn't afford to anger the territory's richest woman, whose word carried weight with their commanding officers. Reluctantly, they backed away, muttering threats about what would happen if they found the Apache again. After they left, Margaret approached the warrior cautiously. He watched her with wary eyes, probably expecting another trick. She pulled out her water bottle and offered it to him. He hesitated, then accepted it gratefully. "Can you ride?" she asked in the few Apache words she had picked up from traders. His eyebrows rose in surprise at hearing his language from a white woman's lips. He nodded slowly, though she could see the effort it cost him. Together they made their way to where his horse waited in a hidden grove. As he prepared to leave, he turned back to her. "Why?" he asked in accented English. Margaret thought for a moment. "Because it was right," she said simply. He studied her face as if memorizing it, then spoke a few words in Apache she didn't understand. Later, she would learn he had said, "I will remember the white woman with courage in her heart." As she watched him ride away into the mountains, Margaret felt something shift inside her. She had always prided herself on being practical, making decisions based on profit and logic. But today, she had acted on pure instinct, risking her reputation and possibly her life for a stranger. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the warrior's eyes, the way he had carried himself despite his wounds. The townspeople would call her foolish if they knew what she had done. Some might even consider it treason, helping an Apache warrior escape the cavalry. But Margaret knew she would make the same choice again. For the first time in years, she had felt truly alive, as if she'd been sleepwalking through her wealthy, empty existence. The encounter had awakened something in her that she thought had died with her husband. The capacity to care about something beyond business and profit. She stood again on her porch, looking toward the mountains where the Apache warrior had disappeared. Somewhere out there, he was probably thinking about their strange meeting too. Margaret had no idea that this single act of mercy would change both their lives forever, setting in motion events that would challenge everything she believed about herself and her world. 3 weeks passed without any sign of the Apache warrior Margaret had helped. She tried to focus on her business. Cattle prices were rising and her mines were producing well. But her mind kept drifting to that moment by the stream, wondering if he had survived his wounds. The answer came on a cold October morning when she discovered her missing cattle in a hidden valley, unharmed and grazing peacefully. This was no coincidence. Someone had gathered them there, away from predators and rustlers. A small pile of stones arranged in a careful pattern told her who was responsible. Margaret began finding other signs. A broken fence mysteriously repaired. Wolves driven away from her herds. A trail marker pointing away from dangerous ground. Someone was watching over her ranch, protecting it from the shadows. The warrior was repaying her kindness in the only way he could. Without revealing himself, her curiosity finally overcame her caution. One evening, she rode alone to the eastern boundary where they had first met. She waited by the stream until darkness fell, then made camp. Near midnight, she heard the soft sound of moccasins on stone. He emerged from the darkness like a ghost, moving with silent grace despite his recent injuries. In the firelight, she could see he had healed well, though a new scar marked his left shoulder. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "You are far from your big house, white woman," he said in careful English. "My name is Margaret," she replied, "and I wanted to thank you for protecting my cattle." He seemed surprised that she had noticed his help. "I am called Ayana by my people. It means eternal blossom in your tongue." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "though the soldiers would know me by other names." They sat across the fire from each other, two people from completely different worlds trying to bridge an impossible gap. Margaret learned that Ayana's band had been pushed deeper into the mountains as more settlers arrived. They were struggling to feed their children, caught between the advancing cavalry and the shrinking wildlands. "Why do you help me?" Margaret asked. "Your people have every reason to hate mine." Ayana poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the star-filled sky. "Hatred is easy," he said quietly. "But you showed mercy when you could have walked away. Among my people, such debts must be honored." As the night wore on, Margaret found herself sharing things she had never told anyone. She spoke of her loneliness, of feeling trapped by her wealth and position. Ayana listened without judgment, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. In return, he told her about his childhood, learning to track and hunt from his grandfather, and his sorrow at watching his people's way of life disappear. When dawn approached, Ayana prepared to leave. "Will you come again?" Margaret asked, surprising herself with her boldness. He hesitated. "It is dangerous for both of us." "If your people knew—" "I don't care what they think," Margaret said, and realized she meant it. Something shifted in Ayana's expression. "The moon will be full in 7 days. If the white woman with courage wishes to hear more stories, she knows where to find me." Their secret meetings became a pattern. Once a week, Margaret would slip away from the ranch house after dark, telling her servants she needed time alone to think. She and Ayana would meet by the stream, sharing food and conversation under the stars. Margaret began learning Apache words and customs, while Ayana practiced his English and listened to her stories about the business world. They were both intelligent people, hungry for knowledge and understanding. Despite their different backgrounds, they discovered a deep compatibility of mind and spirit. During one meeting, Ayana brought her a gift, a small leather pouch decorated with intricate beadwork. "My grandmother made this," he explained. "She said it would protect a person from losing their way." Margaret treasured the pouch, wearing it hidden beneath her clothes during the day. It became a tangible connection to Ayanna and the secret world they were building together. But their growing friendship was not without danger. Tensions in the territory were escalating. Settler family had been killed near Tucson, and the cavalry was conducting aggressive patrols. Margaret heard ugly talk in town about the need to finish off the Apache once and for all. One evening, Ayanna arrived at their meeting place with grim news. "My war chief plans to raid the settlements," he told her. "The young men are angry. They see their families starving while the white settlers grow fat on Apache lands." Margaret's heart sank. "Can you stop them? I've spoken against it, but I am outnumbered. The people are desperate, and desperate men make poor choices." He looked at her with sad eyes. "I will not raise my hand against innocent people, but I cannot prevent others from doing so." The weight of their impossible situation settled between them. Margaret was falling in love with a man whose people were preparing for war against hers. Ayanna was torn between loyalty to his tribe and his growing feelings for a woman from the very culture that was destroying his way of life. "What will we do?" Margaret whispered. Ayanna reached across the fire and touched her hand gently. It was the first time they had made physical contact, and the warmth of his skin sent shivers through her. "I do not know," he admitted. "But I know. I cannot bear to lose you, even if keeping you means betraying everything I was raised to believe." Margaret squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses from years of hard living. "Then we'll find another way, together." Neither of them knew how prophetic those words would prove to be, or what sacrifices they would both have to make to keep their promise. The raid came 3 days later, just as Ayanna had predicted. A wagon train carrying supplies to the mining camps was attacked 20 miles south of Margaret's ranch. 2 teamsters were killed, and several $1,000s worth of goods were stolen. The territorial governor immediately declared martial law and tripled the bounty on Apache scalps. Margaret watched from her office window as cavalry units thundered past her ranch, heading into the mountains with enough firepower to start a small war. Her heart ached, knowing Ayanna was somewhere in those hostile peaks, probably preparing to fight for his life. Colonel William Hayes, the new military commander, arrived at Margaret's ranch the next afternoon with a grim proposition. He was a lean, hard man with cold blue eyes and a reputation for ruthless efficiency in dealing with Indian problems. "Mrs. Sullivan, I'm commandeering your eastern pastures for a staging area," he announced without preamble. "We're going to sweep those mountains clean of Apache, and we need a base of operations." Margaret kept her voice steady, despite her racing heart. "Colonel, that land contains my best grazing areas. Moving my cattle would cost me thousands of dollars. The territorial government will compensate you fairly," Hayes replied. "But this isn't a request. Those savages have gone too far this time, and we're going to finish what should have been done years ago." That night, Margaret couldn't concentrate on anything. Cavalry soldiers were setting up camp less than 2 miles from where she and Ayanna usually met. Her secret meetings would be impossible now, and she had no way to warn him about the military buildup. Her chance came unexpectedly. While reviewing supply invoices in town, she overheard 2 Apache scouts talking in Spanish near the livery stable. They were working for the cavalry, tracking their own people for money. Margaret's Spanish was good enough to understand their conversation. They had found fresh signs of a small Apache camp hidden in Copper Canyon. Just 5 miles from her ranch, Margaret made a desperate decision. That evening, she told her foreman she was riding out to check on some strays. Instead, she headed straight for Copper Canyon, praying she could reach Ayanna before the cavalry found him. She located the camp just after sunset. A handful of brush shelters hidden among the rocks. Several warriors emerged as she approached, their weapons ready. Margaret raised her hands peacefully and called out Ayanna's name. He appeared from behind a boulder, his face showing both relief and alarm at seeing her. After a quick exchange, in Apache with his companions, he approached her horse. "You should not be here," he said urgently. "It is too dangerous." "The soldiers are coming," Margaret whispered. "Tomorrow morning, maybe sooner." "Your scouts have betrayed the location of this camp." Ayanna's expression hardened. "I know of these men who sell their people's blood for white man's gold. We expected this." "Then why haven't you moved?" "My sister's husband was wounded in the raid," He cannot travel far. Iana's voice was heavy with pain. We hope to buy another day or two for his strength to return. Margaret looked around the small camp and saw an older woman tending to a man lying on a blanket. Several children peered at her from behind their mother's skirts. These weren't the fierce warriors described in the newspapers. They were just families trying to survive. There's a box canyon on my property, Margaret said quickly, hidden with water and grass. My husband used to keep horses there during roundups. You could hide there until your brother-in-law heals. At her in amazement, you would risk everything for people you do not know. I know you, Margaret said simply. And anyone you call family is under my protection. The next few hours were the most dangerous of Margaret's life. She led the small band through darkness to the hidden canyon, using game trails to avoid the cavalry patrols. The wounded man had to be carried on a makeshift stretcher, slowing their progress. Every sound made Margaret's heart pound, expecting to hear the thunder of approaching horses. They reached the canyon just before dawn. Margaret helped the Apache set up a temporary camp, sharing her knowledge of the area's water sources and safe paths. As the sun rose, she prepared to leave, knowing she had to be back at the ranch before her absence was noticed. Iana walked her to where her horse waited. Margaret, he said softly, using her name for the first time. What you have done? There are no words. Yes, there are, Margaret replied, gathering her courage. I love you, Iana. I've been trying to deny it, but I can't anymore. He stepped closer, his dark eyes searching her face. And I love you, white woman with the brave heart. But love between us is impossible. Your people will never accept it. And mine will see it as betrayal. Margaret reached up and touched his cheek gently. Let me worry about my people. Iana caught her hand and pressed it against his face. You do not understand what you are asking. If they discover what you have done, they will call you traitor. They may even hang you. Then we'll have to make sure they don't discover it. For a moment, they simply held each other, two people from different worlds who had found something precious and forbidden. Then reality crashed back in as they heard distant bugle calls echoing across the mountains. The cavalry is beginning. Their sweep, Iana said grimly. You must go, and you must not come here again. It is too dangerous. Margaret wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. How will I know you're safe? The same way as before? Watch for the signs. He kissed her forehead gently. Trust that love will find a way, even when the path seems impossible. As Margaret rode back toward her ranch, she could see columns of smoke rising from the mountains where the cavalry was burning out Apache strongholds. She had just committed an act that could be considered treason. She felt more alive than she had in years, but the hardest part was yet to come. Colonel Hayes was waiting for her when she arrived home, his cold eyes taking in her dusty clothes. And tired horse. Rather early to be chasing strays, isn't it, Mrs. Sullivan? I asked with suspicious politeness. Margaret forced herself to remain calm. I couldn't sleep, Colonel. Worry about the Apache situation, I suppose. I thought some fresh air might clear my head. Hayes studied her for a long moment, then nodded curtly. Understandable. These are trying times for everyone. I trust you'll be more careful about riding alone until we've dealt with this Apache problem permanently. Of course, Colonel, Margaret replied, knowing that her real problems were just beginning. For 2 weeks, the mountains echoed with gunfire as Colonel Hayes conducted his ruthless campaign against the Apache. Margaret maintained her normal routine, attending business meetings and social gatherings, while her heart remained in the hidden canyon with Iana and his people. The signs he left for her became more precious than gold. A certain arrangement of stones near her cattle meant his group was safe. An eagle feather caught in a fence post told her they had found the medical supplies she secretly left at a predetermined spot. These small communications were their only connection while the territory burned with violence. Margaret's growing nervousness didn't go unnoticed. Her foreman, Jake Morrison, approached her one morning with concern written on his weathered face. Mrs. Sullivan, you haven't been yourself lately, he said carefully. The men are starting to talk. Some think you're getting sick from all this Apache trouble. Margaret forced a smile. I'm fine, Jake. Just worried about the cattle with all these soldiers tramping around. It's more than that, Jake insisted. You jump at every sound, and I've seen you riding the eastern boundary almost every day. What are you looking for out there? Before Margaret could answer, a commotion in the ranch yard interrupted them. Colonel Hayes was riding up with a squad of soldiers, and he had someone with him, an Apache, man in chains. Margaret's blood ran cold when she recognized one of Ayana's companions from the hidden camp. The man's face was battered from beatings, but his eyes still held defiance. Hayes dismounted and approached Margaret with a satisfied expression. "Mrs. Sullivan, I thought you'd be interested to know we captured this Apache warrior yesterday. He's been most uncooperative about revealing the location of his band, but I'm confident we'll loosen his tongue soon enough." Margaret struggled to keep her voice steady. "What does this have to do with me, Colonel?" "We found him remarkably close to your property," Hayes replied, watching her face carefully. "In fact, he was carrying supplies that appear to have come from your general store in town. Curious, don't you think?" Margaret's mind raced. She had indeed bought extra food and medicine, claiming it was for her ranch hands. If Hayes connected those purchases to the captured Apache, her secret would be exposed. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Colonel," she said with as much dignity as she could muster. "I'm not implying anything yet," Hayes said smoothly. "I am conducting a thorough investigation. It seems someone in this area has been helping the Apache, providing them with supplies and information about our movements. Such a person would be guilty of treason against the United States." That evening, Margaret paced her study like a caged animal. She had to warn Ayana that one of his men was captured, but approaching the hidden canyon now would be suicidal. Hayes probably had scouts watching every trail. Her salvation came from an unexpected source. Maria Santos, her Mexican housekeeper, knocked softly on the study door. "Señora, there is someone here to see you. A trader who says he has business." "About horses?" Margaret looked up hopefully. Traders often served as unofficial messengers between the various communities in the territory. "Send him in." The man who entered was elderly, with silver hair and kind eyes. He introduced himself as Roberto Valdez, a horse trader who worked throughout the southwestern territories. "Señora Sullivan, I bring greetings from mutual friends in the mountains," he said carefully. "They wish you to know that they are grateful for your kindness, but they fear the danger to you has become too great." Margaret's heart pounded. "What do you mean?" the Apache leader called. "Ayana has asked me to give you this." Roberto handed her a small piece of deerskin with Apache symbols painted on it. "He says the woman with courage must forget the paths to the high places." The soldiers watched too closely now. Margaret studied the pictographs, wishing she understood them better. "Is everyone safe?" "For now. But one of their warriors was taken yesterday. If he talks under torture," Roberto shrugged. "Sadly, it would be better if certain generous people were far away when that happens." After Roberto left, Margaret stood at her window looking toward the mountains. Kiana was trying to protect her by ending their connection, but she couldn't abandon him now. The captured warrior might reveal the location of the hidden canyon. At any moment, she made a dangerous decision. Late that night, Margaret saddled her quietest horse and rode toward the mountains using a route she had never taken before. She had to circle far to the north to avoid the cavalry patrols. Adding hours to her journey, dawn was breaking when she finally reached the canyon. The Apache camp was nearly empty. Just Ayana and two older warriors remained to guard the rear. While the others moved deeper into the wilderness, Ayana's face showed both joy and alarm when he saw her. "Margaret, you should not have come. It is too dangerous." "Your friend was captured," she said urgently. "Colonel Hayes suspects someone is helping you. He's watching my ranch, I know. That is why we are leaving." Ayana's voice was heavy with sadness. "My wounded brother-in-law can travel now. We will go deep into Mexico, where the soldiers cannot follow." Margaret felt her world collapsing. "You're leaving? For how long? Forever, maybe? The Apache wars are ending, Margaret. My people are broken, scattered. Those who survive must find new homes far from this land." "Take me with you," Margaret said desperately. Ayana stared at her in shock. "You cannot be serious. You would give up everything, your wealth, your position, your entire way of life. What good are any of those things without you?" Margaret stepped closer to him. "I love you, Ayana. I'll follow you to Mexico or anywhere else." For a moment, hope flickered in Ayana's dark eyes. Then reality reasserted itself. My beloved, you do not know what you are asking. Life with my people would be hard beyond anything you can imagine. We would live as fugitives, always running, always hiding. We would have nothing. No comforts, no safety, no certainty. I would have you, Margaret said simply. Ayanna took her hands in his voice breaking with emotion, and I would watch the woman I love slowly fade away from hardship and regret. I would see you grow to hate the choice that destroyed your life. I cannot bear that. So this is goodbye? Margaret whispered. This is love, Ayanna replied. Love means letting go of what we want most to protect those we treasure. As if to underscore his words, the sound of distant gunshots echoed through the canyon. The cavalry was getting closer. You must go now, Ayanna said urgently. Take the southern trail. It will bring you home without crossing the soldier's path. Margaret wanted to argue, to fight against this terrible ending, but she could see the pain in Ayanna's eyes. He was suffering as much as she was. Will I ever see you again? She asked. Ayanna kissed her gently, a kiss that tasted of tears and broken dreams. In this life or the next, we will find each other again. This I promise. You. As Margaret rode away from the canyon for the last time, she carried with her the memory of Ayanna standing among the rocks, watching her go with love and sorrow written on his face. Behind them both, the sound of approaching cavalry grew louder, driving them apart like storm winds scattering leaves. Margaret returned to her ranch as the sun climbed high, her heart shattered, but her resolve growing stronger with each mile. She had lost Ayanna, but she was not ready to accept that loss as final. There had to be another way, a path that would allow them to be together without destroying either of their lives. Colonel Hayes was waiting in her parlor when she arrived, his cold eyes taking in her disheveled appearance with obvious suspicion. Another early morning ride, Mrs. Sullivan? He asked with false courtesy. Couldn't sleep again, Margaret replied, forcing herself to remain calm. The sound of all that gunfire in the mountains? Yes, we've had quite a successful morning. Flushed out another Apache camp and eliminated several hostiles. Hayes studied her reaction carefully. We also found evidence of outside assistance, caches of food and medical supplies that clearly came from town merchants. Margaret's blood chilled, but she kept her expression neutral. I'm sure you'll discover who's responsible. Oh, I'm quite confident of that. Hayes smiled coldly. In fact, our captured Apache finally decided to talk this morning. Very interesting information. He mentioned a white woman who helped his people, though he claims not to know her identity. Margaret felt the walls closing in around her. How terrible that someone would betray their own kind. Indeed, though I suspect this person thought they were being compassionate rather than treasonous. Hayes leaned forward. Tell me, Mrs. Sullivan, what's your opinion on showing mercy to enemies? The question was clearly a trap, but Margaret answered honestly. I believe mercy is never wrong, Colonel, even toward enemies, even toward those who murder innocent settlers. Margaret thought of Ayanna and his starving people, driven to desperate acts by desperation and loss. Even then, violence breeds violence. Perhaps if we tried understanding instead of killing, we might find lasting peace. Hayes's expression hardened. Such attitudes are exactly how this Apache problem has festered for so long. Soft-hearted sentimentality has no place in dealing with savages. After Hayes left, Margaret sat in her study, staring at a map of Mexico. Ayanna had said his people were heading south, but Mexico was vast. How could she find one small band of refugees in all that wilderness? Her answer came that evening through Roberto Valdez, the horse trader. He appeared at her back door after dark, looking nervous and worried. Senora, I bring bad news from the mountains, he whispered. The soldiers found the canyon where your friends were hiding. They arrived just hours after everyone left.
Accurate.
Heart skipped. Were any of them hurt? No, but it was very close. The Apache leader asked me to tell you something important. Roberto paused, glancing around nervously. He said to tell you that the eastern star points toward hope, and the journey takes 7 days for those who know the old trading paths. Margaret understood immediately. Ayanna was telling her how to find him, giving her directions to their destination in Mexico. But he was also testing her. seeing if she truly meant what she had said about following him anywhere. That night, Margaret made her choice. She couldn't live the rest of her life wondering what if. She began making careful preparations, liquidating assets, and converting them to gold and silver coins that could be easily transported. She wrote letters to her lawyer, leaving instructions for the ranch to be sold, and the proceeds donated to a territorial orphanage to her servants and ranch hands. She explained that the Apache troubles had shaken her nerves, and she needed an extended rest in California. Only to her faithful housekeeper Maria did she hint at the truth. "Senora, are you sure about this?" Maria asked with tears in her eyes. "You are giving up everything?" "No, Maria," Margaret replied firmly. "I'm finally reaching for everything that matters." Margaret's preparations took 3 days. She disguised her departure as a business trip to Tucson, taking a light wagon and telling everyone she would return within the week. Instead, she met Roberto at a predetermined location 20 miles south of town. "Are you certain about this, Senora?" the old trader asked. "The life you are choosing will be very difficult." "I'm certain," Margaret said, surprised by how calm she felt. "I've spent too many years living safely and being miserable. I'd rather risk everything and be happy." They traveled by night and rested during the day, following old smuggling routes that avoided military patrols and settlements. Roberto proved to be an excellent guide, knowing every water hole and safe camping spot along the way as they journeyed deeper into Mexico. Margaret felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Each mile took her further from her old life of wealth and loneliness, closer to an uncertain but authentic future. On the 6th night, they made camp in a box canyon surrounded by towering red rocks. Roberto seemed unusually nervous, constantly checking their back trail. "What's wrong?" Margaret asked. "Someone has been following us since yesterday," Roberto admitted. "I hoped I was mistaken, but I saw dust on the horizon again this afternoon." Margaret's heart sank. The cavalry, perhaps? Or bounty hunters looking for Apache refugees? Roberto's weathered face was grim. "Either way, we may have led danger to your friends." That night, Margaret lay awake, staring at the stars and wondering if her desperate gamble would end in disaster for everyone she cared about. She had risked everything on love, but love might not be enough to overcome the harsh realities of their divided world. As dawn approached, she heard the distant sound of horses approaching. Many horses moving fast across the desert floor. Margaret gripped the small pistol Roberto had given her, knowing it would be useless against a cavalry patrol, but determined not to be taken alive. She had come too far to turn back now. Whatever waited ahead, reunion with Ayanna or capture by her enemies, Margaret Sullivan was ready to face her destiny with courage. The pampered widow was gone forever, replaced by a woman who had finally learned what was truly worth fighting for. The approaching horses turned out to be Apache scouts, not cavalry. Margaret's heart soared when she recognized one of them as Ayanna's cousin, a young warrior named Tokota. He greeted Roberto warmly, then stared at Margaret with obvious surprise. "The white woman has come far from her big house," he said in careful English. "She has come home," Margaret replied. Using one of the Apache phrases Ayanna had taught her, Dakota's stern expression softened into a smile. "Ayanna will be very happy or very worried, perhaps both." They traveled together for the rest of the day, climbing higher into the Sierra Madre Mountains, where few soldiers dared venture. The landscape was breathtakingly beautiful but harsh, with towering peaks and deep canyons that seemed to stretch forever. Finally, as the sun was setting, they crested a ridge, and Margaret saw the Apache camp spread out in a hidden valley below. It was larger than she had expected, perhaps 50 people, including many women and children. Smoke from cooking fires drifted up through the pine trees, and she could hear the sound of laughter and conversation. Ayanna appeared at the edge of the camp before their party had fully descended into the valley. He stood frozen for a moment, as if unable to believe his eyes. Then he was running toward them, his face showing a mixture of joy and concern that made Margaret's heart race. "Margaret," he said breathlessly as she dismounted from her horse. "What have you done?" "What I should have done weeks ago," she replied, walking into his arms. "I've come to be with you." For a long moment they simply held each other, both overwhelmed by the reality of being reunited. Then Ayanna pulled back to study her face. Do you understand what this means? There can be no going back. Your old life is finished. Good, Margaret said firmly. That life was empty without you. I'd rather face hardship with love than luxury without it. The Apache camp welcomed Margaret with curious but warm hospitality. Ayanna's sister, a gentlewoman named Itzel, helped her set up a simple shelter and taught her practical skills for survival in the wilderness. Margaret learned to grind corn, preserve meat, and identify edible plants. Her soft hands grew calloused from work, but her heart had never felt lighter. The challenges were real and constant. Food was often scarce, requiring careful rationing and frequent moves to find new hunting grounds. The weather could be brutal, with scorching days and freezing nights. Margaret's expensive dresses were replaced by practical buckskin clothing, and her elaborate hairstyles gave way to simple braids decorated with beads. Itzel made for her, but there were also moments of profound beauty. Evening gatherings around the fire where elders told ancient stories under star-filled skies, dawn ceremonies that connected the people to the land and seasons, the simple joy of watching children play games that had been passed down for generations. Margaret discovered strengths she never knew she possessed. When a fever struck several children in the camp, she worked tirelessly alongside the medicine woman, using knowledge from her educated background, combined with traditional healing practices. When food ran low during a particularly harsh winter, she suggested hunting strategies she had learned from observing wildlife on her ranch slowly, or earned respect from the Apache people, not as Ayanna's white woman, but as someone who contributed meaningfully to their survival. The elderly chief Nalnish began calling her Ishkane, Fire Woman, for her fierce determination and loyalty. 3 months into her new life, Margaret and Ayanna were married in a traditional Apache ceremony. As the sun set over the mountains, they exchanged vows that bound them together, not just in love, but as equal partners facing an uncertain future. Margaret wore a wedding dress of white deerskin decorated with turquoise and silver, her hair braided with eagle feathers that symbolized courage and freedom. Are you happy? Ayanna asked as they sat together after the ceremony, watching their adopted family celebrate around the fire. Happier than I ever imagined possible, Margaret replied honestly. I thought I knew what love was before, but this is something completely different. Ayanna smiled and pulled her closer. You have given up everything for me, your wealth, your position, your own people. How can I ever be worthy of such sacrifice? You're not a sacrifice, Margaret said softly. You're my choice. Every day I choose you in this life and this family. That's not sacrifice, that's love. Their peaceful existence was interrupted one morning by the arrival of a Mexican military patrol. The captain, a stern man named Valdez, informed them that the Mexican government was under pressure from the United States to return Apache refugees. We do not wish to make war with you, the captain explained through an interpreter. But we cannot allow American Apache to use our territory as a base for raids across the border. Chief Nalnish responded with dignity. We seek only to live. In peace, we raid no settlements, steal no cattle. We ask only to be left alone to raise our children. The captain seemed sympathetic but firm. I understand your situation, but my orders are clear. You must move further south, into the deep mountains where the American soldiers cannot reach. This meant leaving their carefully chosen valley with its reliable water source and good hunting. The people would have to venture into even more remote wilderness, facing greater hardships and isolation. That night, Margaret and Ayanna talked long into the darkness about their options. They could stay with the band and face increasing danger from both American and Mexican authorities. They could try to disappear into one of the larger Mexican cities, living as ordinary citizens, or they could attempt something even more daring. Have been thinking, Ayanna said slowly. There are Apache people living peacefully on reservations now. Not the life our grandfathers knew, but safe for the children. Perhaps we could return north and try to make a new way. Margaret was quiet for a long time. Would your people accept that? Would the Americans accept me? I do not know. I am tired of running, tired of watching children go hungry, because we cannot stay anywhere long enough to plant crops or build proper homes. They made their decision together, as they had learned to make all-important choices. With Chief Nalnish's blessing, Kay would leave the band and travel north to the San Carlos reservation, where Ayanna had distant relatives. It was a gamble that might cost them their freedom, or even their lives, but it offered something precious. The possibility of a stable home. The journey back to Arizona took 2 weeks. Margaret felt strange returning to American territory, wondering if she would be recognized and arrested as a traitor. But the woman who crossed the border bore little resemblance to the wealthy widow who had disappeared months earlier. Sun and wind had bronzed her skin, hard work had toughened her body, and love had transformed her from the inside out. At the reservation, they were greeted with suspicion and curiosity. Ayanna's relatives remembered him, but they were shocked. To see him with a white wife? Margaret faced hostility from some Apache families, who saw her as a symbol of the culture that had destroyed their way of life. But gradually, through patience and genuine respect for Apache customs, Margaret found acceptance. She taught reading and writing to Apache children, helping them navigate between 2 worlds. She used her business skills to negotiate better deals with traders, ensuring the people received fair prices for their crafts and livestock. Years passed. Margaret and Ayanna built a small adobe house on the reservation, raised 2 children who grew up bilingual and bicultural, watched their adopted community slowly heal from the wounds of war. There were still hardships, poverty, prejudice, and the constant struggle to preserve Apache culture in a changing world. But on quiet evenings, sitting on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Margaret knew she had made the right choice. She had traded wealth for love, security for adventure, and loneliness for a family that transcended the boundaries of race and culture. "Do you ever regret it?" Ayanna asked one evening as they watched their children play with other reservation kids. Margaret smiled, her hand finding his as naturally as breathing. "Never. I was the territory's richest widow, but I was also the loneliest. Now I'm the happiest woman in the world." As darkness fell over the desert, they sat together in comfortable silence. 2 people from different worlds who had found something more precious than gold, a love strong enough to bridge any divide and brave enough to risk everything for the promise of forever together.